the lands of Bretland, where the white cliffs stand guard against the cold sea, in the seasons that are very wet, the men of the island sit by their great log fires, and they tell a tale. And those tales they tell are the stories of a kind and wise king and his people. They are the sagas of Grimnir the Grim.
Hello, lovelies. Right, housekeeping. You know how this goes. It's been a bit of a wasted week. I was stuck in waiting mode, which anyone with anxiety or similar mental health struggles will understand. Waiting for my laptop to arrive. I needed a new laptop. I completely wore out the keyboard on another one yet again, so I've spent way too much money on a keyboard with on a laptop with a mechanical keyboard. So hopefully that will last. Apparently the keys are rated for like 15 million depressions. So that's more depressions than me. Yeah, so there was that, and then I also had to go back to the hospital for a checkup. Long-time viewers, because it's been a few years now, will know that I originally ended up in hospital after going for an eye exam and then finding that my eyes were exploding from the inside due to massively high blood pressure. Had an operation, lots of drugs, and many checkups since then. And I guess it's been, 2.5, 3 years now. And finally, I am now completely discharged from the medical system. There's a small amount of permanent damage to my eyes, but they're not getting any worse. And extra good news, last time I went, they thought a cataract was forming, but apparently it's not. So, all good. I am on an even keel. I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that, or you'll be cursing my name and wishing some new deathly illness upon me. You measure a man by his enemies. A couple of lovely opportunities have fallen into my lap, which I have felt that I kind of have to take up, but I can't say more because NDAs and basic professional etiquette there, but should be interesting next year. Some things are a little bit outside my comfort zone, and things that I don't think are done well, and I've been given the opportunity to do them in a way that I think is good. I know that's all very vague, but yeah, what are you going to do? So Tuesdays, given that Tabletopless appears to be shifting to do weekend shows, probably starting from next week, just before everyone breaks for the holidays and everything. So that leaves my Tuesdays back being somewhat free again, which means you might get an additional video every week. And at the moment, I'm going to use that Tuesday slot for my political commentary and content. I know I do YouTube wrong. I should make a separate channel for it and build that up and blah 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 blah. No. I have different playlists on different topics. You can avail yourselves of those via my landing page. And otherwise, if I stick to Tuesdays, then that gives people another way to avoid it. But, plenty of other people of different political slants do not avoid bringing their politics into their game stuff, and they do all right, and I used to, so I kind of want to go back to it. As it's already cost me about 150 to 200 subs over the last year or so, but I'm determined to stick it out. Failing that, if there's nothing that tickles my fancy when it comes to politics that's going on, I might also use the Tuesdays to go into some of the other things that are my passions. History, folklore, language, storytelling, explainers on various topics, lore videos on things that aren't games, other stuff. I'll try to limit that to Tuesdays, because I know it's not what most of you are here for, but I mostly do this for me, to be honest. There's been a lot of social media disruption going on lately. YouTube, off the back of trying to force everyone not to use ad blockers, I kind of sympathise, but God, I can't stand American terrestrial TV, let alone the amount of adverts they want to put in on YouTube videos. But yeah, off the back of that, they're also starting to block secondary sites like Odyssey and so forth from having their auto downloaders, so you can no longer get away with just posting to YouTube and then relying on these tools to pick up everything else. So it's not worth my while going over to these other sites and uploading separately. There's not enough of an audience there for me, and I can't seem to carry my audience from other places over to Rumble or Odyssey or wherever else. So YouTube is it. If by chance the auto uploaders are still working and you see this video, sorry, you're going to have to come back to YouTube. So yeah, there's that. Also, with Elon Musk throwing himself entirely behind the new US regime, which kind of goes against his promises to make Twitter and so on more apolitical, doesn't it? But there's been a second kind of exodus from Twitter over to Blue Sky. Personally, I still find Blue Sky kind of dead, and a lot of people that went over there early on are the kinds of people that do not like me. I'm not finding it particularly good. But a lot more people are now moving over there, apparently, and you can find me there, but I can't remember my nickname. It's probably Grimasaur as well. For anyone who cares, the Phantasy Star RPG is now available for pre-order, if you want to do a little web search on that. Phantasy Star, Phan. Loved the computer games, but they seem to have angled it more to the older games, which I didn't like as much. It's something I've thought about doing a semi-clone of before in the past, but I haven't. But apparently that's coming out soon. And Shin Megami Tensei, the PDF is out if you backed it. So go and check your drive-through to see if you can download that. A lot of people have been throwing a lot of game names at me for me to review. I've had a lot of expenses towards the latter end of this year. I am going to have a lot of stuff that I previously kickstarted when I was more flush coming through, or crowdfunded otherwise. So November, December should be relatively busy with new product. Otherwise, I'll be delving into my extensive collection of odd and obscure and older games. If any companies, indie or otherwise, want to send me books to review, I will happily do so, but just, keep in mind that I'm going to be brutally honest about whatever you do send me. Mongoose did, was it last year, I think? It may have been earlier this year. Sent me a big box of stuff, and I reviewed all that. So, yeah, feel free to do the same. But I'm going to try and stick to my rule of only reviewing physical products. Alright, sorry that's 10 minutes of preamble and waffle, but here we go. I reviewed the new Dungeon Master's Guide, and some of you had comments on that. Truffle says, I'm sorry, did you say you can't have a forge until you reach the appropriate level, even though they likely grew up in some village that had a forge? These people have really forgotten that the rules are meant to reflect a world. Yeah, it's very divorced from it. I even saw some people say that the game rules aren't the physics of the game world, but they are. That's something we used to kind of both implicitly and explicitly understand, that they had to make sense. And yeah, the Bastion rules don't make a great deal of sense. Doc Necrotic says, infantilization, corporate cleanliness, no depth for advice or variables, screwing with setting assumptions, overall mid-slop. Checks out as a bog-standard Wizbro release. Yeah, I still prefer the presentation. to pre-2024 5th edition. I wish we could settle on terminology for this new edition. Yeah, I prefer the presentation, but the content is just, I think, as I said in the review, it consistently hits this sweet spot between too much and not enough, thereby satisfying nobody. But there is good news is there is going to be plenty of room for third-party people, like 24-hour party people. There's going to be plenty of room for people to expand on and over-explain and create trash DM's Guild products to cover what they haven't. So, yay, woohoo. Beetle just says, mostly every review I see from you gets an average score. I wonder which recent games have received high ratings. So this is where, if I was a better YouTuber, I'd say go back and look at all the videos and then you can find out. Looking across to my left at my main bookcase of games, I liked Transformers and G.I. Joe enough to buy additional books. I had some nice things to say about Advanced Fighting Fantasy. I liked the new Marvel game enough. I think I said it's the best one since Phase Rip. Vaesen is good. Fallout, I said, was good. That's... Oh, and the Iron Kingdom's 5e releases are good. So, there's a lot out there, but a 3 out of 5 is average for me, right? And most people, when they score games and things, it's like the minimum you're going to see, even for an awful game, is usually 7 out of 10, which means there's really just a very small compressed scale, but I use the full numbers. So you have to earn your 4 and you have to be outstanding to get a 5. I think I said the artwork in Vaesen was a 5, to give you some sort of example. I may have even given some of the Stalinhag based stuff a 5 for art. So there you go. I would be as harsh on myself, for anyone who cares to know, but there you go. It's just there's been a lot of mid stuff, and the stuff I tend to buy tends to be things I think are important to the history of gaming, even if they're things I don't necessarily like myself. I increasingly see myself as an archivist, as I think I've said. So it might not be things I like, but they're things that are important for other reasons. Jason of the Hill says, formulaic critique. I think I feel what you're throwing down, but I would ask, isn't this oftentimes the best way to learn? Those who don't know music think that jazz is ruleless and formless. This couldn't be further from the truth, and those musicians spent years and years learning the formulaic parts of music so they knew precisely how to bend and break them in the best ways. I don't think that beginners will do it in a formulaic manner as a bug. I feel it as a feature. Now, if they ever grow out of that, sure. If they never grow out of that, sure, that would stink. But giving beginners very specific chords and scales to cut their teeth on seems more right than wrong. I'd been running games for quite a while before I stumbled across something like a 3-act outline, and immediately wished I'd learned about it that way sooner. Okay, but there are a variety of act structures, 4 acts, 5 acts, and others. The problem I have is a combination of what seems to be more modern gamer psychology and the attitude that a lot of games and studios seem to be taking, in that they're saying this is how you play, and that being received by people as this is how you play, especially when it comes to things like live plays and so on, which reinforce this effect. Like, this is how you play, you do it like Critical Role, or you do it in this very set structure. I like the Japanese RPGs because they don't have the same baseline assumptions, and they have developed in a somewhat isolated niche compared to Anglo RPGs, right? I like them for that reason, but there is this common factor across Japanese RPGs that they are very, very formulaic. They have a very, very strict set structure. There are exceptions, of course. And that, to me, as a freewheeling improvisational style GM, feels incredibly stifling. So my concern is that the way these are presented, the language that is used, and the culture into which they are being injected is one of following the rules and doing it a certain way, and that is the right way, and and that's it. So it's a combination of things that make me wary of it. I would much rather leave things a little vaguer so that people have to think for themselves and learn by noodling around rather than being told this is the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Also, because I think if you do it in a formulaic way, it's very rapidly going to get boring for people. Sinosaurus says, reading up on Bastions puzzles me. Base building is something which is a nice thing to add and unsupported in the original. Not quite true. But the way it is implemented feels more like it's an MMORPG mechanic, like RuneScape houses, than an actual base of operations. Especially the map in the D&D Beyond article, which just flagrantly goes against how buildings work. All of it. The player-exclusive nature, the mechanistic rules, the silly level requirements, the specific named items, make it feel like this is a special zone outside of the game world that you get teleported to when you open the door, rather than something actually existing in the world. Yeah, I agree. It feels like, oh, I hit level 25 in my MMORPG. That means that the housing is unlocked. And now I can spend an enormous amount of effort decorating a house that really nobody except me is going to see. That's kind of what it feels like. Whereas a more robust system could have allowed you to build bases and bastions for enemies and so on, find ways to build up maps in an interesting and plausible way, and could have been more money sinks for characters, which is something characters desperately need in a lot of D&D games, rather than level locked additional bonuses. So Fire Touched 5629 says, would you say stay in 2014 edition? For the moment, I would say yes. I mean, we don't have the trifecta out yet. We're still waiting on the monster manual, so you still don't have a complete game of 2024 edition. 5th edition, for all its faults, does at least have a whole bunch of bases covered and has an enormous amount of content out for it. The only other more complete, quote-unquote, edition is probably 3rd edition, so if you count Pathfinder stuff as well. So I can't see a reason to switch yet. On Edge Runners, Ein0 says, well, at least a review that points out the real issue with the whole Cyberpunk Red thing. The game isn't bad, but it's too streamlined, too standardized. That's all still okay, easily tweakable, but the fact that lore is based on a no one asked for it 2045 scarcity version of 2020, with little addition instead of the 2077 reimagined and up-to-date modernized technology society, never really made any sense to me either. And you know what? In a very recent Q&A with Jay Grayett, Artel Zorian, he said that there's nothing like a 2070s book on the make, and not even a Night City 2070s lore book coming in plans. And some others suggested that all the info is on enough wikis, blah blah blah. So yeah, that's all you can expect on physical release for a while. And in the end, it just replaces the original Red starter kit with a 2070s facelift. And if you want more, make it yourself or wait for random digital DLC drops on their website. Like you said, weird decisions, always offbeat, and wasted opportunity. One wasted opportunity after another. Yeah, so, well, then there's contradictory things about a 2077 set or book or whatever. Maybe one side of the company doesn't know what the other side is doing. I guess we'll find out in good time. On Mouse Ritter, Barry Badranath says, "Hey Grim, what system would you use to run a Dark Souls setting other than the official game?" My own Total Party Kill, combined with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, perhaps. There's quite a few games out there that try to be Souls-like, but I guess it depends which aspects of Dark Souls you're wanting to emulate, whether it's the difficulty and importance of character build and tactics, whether it's the undying and trying over and over aspect, whether it's the dark horror setting or what. But I would say Lamentations would make a good baseline to start from. Excuse me. Liberty Avalanche says, "I actually prefer no dice in a box set. I have more than enough and would rather have those couple of bucks go to something else in the set. I get the argument for having a complete game, but honestly, outside of the D&D starter sets, how many people are picking up these kind of sets as their introduction to RPGs? Yeah, not many. And that is frequently my complaint about games that angle themselves for beginners, but which no beginner is ever going to encounter, let alone pick up. Mouse Ritter certainly tries to be a starter RPG, especially with the nice box and the Emmy Award for best family game. Excuse me. They're trying, at least. But yeah, it's probably silly. As for the dice, I don't know. I would just always rather have a complete game if you're going to do that. Of course, that may have been a VAT thing, at least here in Europe and in the UK. I don't know, but some cheese-themed dice or something in there would be great. Edward Kopp says, "Never been a fan of punched-out cardboard tokens, which is probably why I never played Avalon Hill games. If this is supposed to be a luxury-priced product, I would want something that has more class and panache, like shaped and coloured counters of various materials, so they feel nice in the hand." Yeah, it's priced as a luxury product, but it isn't really a luxury product. It was a bit thin on the ground. I guess that would, in lots of ways, I guess that would be my main complaint about it. Edward goes on, "Question for you, how many more anthropomorphic cutesy animal games do you think the market can sustain? This seems to be a generational thing. I'm guessing the player base for these games is a very narrow demographic that is focused on under 35 female and under 25 male markets." I mean, maybe. This has always been a problem, finding an acceptable, charming face of gaming for younger cohorts. I mean, younger even than you say, or things that might be more appealing to different markets. And lots of people like Redwall, and lots of people like Secrets of Nim, and all these other things. I mean, there's clearly a market for it. It's just how extensive that market is, I don't know. What I was really looking for from Mouse Guard, from Mouse Ritter, was something like the computer game Tales of Iron, Tales, not ILS, though the pun is intended, which is a great game and a great story, and I strongly suggest people play it. It's a mouse game with a kind of Warhammer fantasy aesthetic to a lot of it. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing it, and yeah, that's kind of the experience that I was after, and none of these really offer that. On the old Blades in the Dark review, Lemons says, "I have very limited experience playing games with systems like this one, come to think of it. That being said, for me, this type of system seems good at guiding a group in constructing the story, but it seems to fail at immersing them in the story. So the end product, if written down, may be worth reading as a book. but the experience itself feels more like a collaborative writing session than living through a scenario. I wonder if my groups are missing something. I think just like me and like most of my groups, it's just that's not the experience you want when you sit down to play a role-playing game, and I'm not sure it counts as a role-playing game because you're not really playing a role, if you follow. So I think it just doesn't do what we want, and therefore will always feel stilted, unengaging and disappointing to us. Some people want that experience, which is fine. And those people tend to get very upset with me for not liking their game. But it is what it is, and yeah, we have the same feeling you do. On the old Conan 2D20 review, JP Fairchild says, lots of people complaining about my reviews this week. This game review seems negative from the beginning, but without much rationalization behind the criticism. My main problem with Conan 2D20 is, I think, firstly, that it was a very early iteration of the 2D20 system, and thus had a lot of rough edges that hadn't been sort of filed down. It didn't quite feel customized enough to Conan, though I only reviewed the core book and I didn't get any of the follow-ups, so meh. And it seemed almost embarrassed by the source material and its content. You know, very masculine, quite suggestive, whereas previous incarnations of Conan games have not shied away from that. The Modiphius 2D20 version kind of avoided it to a large extent, and so it felt kind of neutered and slightly odd and quite un-Conan-y in its presentation. On the old Ex Machina review, lots of old videos seem to be showing up in people's feeds, and this, I was mentioning at the beginning, this seems to be down to changes in algorithms and issues going across all kinds of social media at the moment. But anyway, Scotty CVS says, Grim, have you had a look at the new version of Tristat? It's called Tristat Core and is the generic name with a new Besom and others using this new system. I'd be interested in your opinion. I've read a bit of it and it feels very GURPS but light. Hope you're doing well. I am okay, thank you for asking. I wouldn't buy it due to past experience with Tristat. It would have to be radically different for me to be over the moon about it. Because while Tristat is extremely simple as a core, everything that's built on top of it rapidly makes it unwieldy. Alright, I've left Kalergi and politics video stuff to the end. So, a retro fan says on the Kalergi plan, it's very real, you lying Marxist. Of course, he doesn't offer any evidence. I doubt he knows what Marxism is, or what a Marxist is, or can tell the difference between an insistence on accurate political terminology and professing that ideology, because I'm not a Marxist. And just asserting something doesn't make it true. Shibzux says, in 2023, 31.8% of all live births were to non-UK born mothers in England and Wales, and 37.3% of live births were to parents where either one or both were born outside the UK. In London, 67.4% of live births are to foreign-born mothers. In primary schools, 37.4% of pupils have an ethnic minority background in England and Wales. This is up from around 19% in 2003, 20 years ago. Kalergi plan or not, it's ethnic suicide. No, it isn't, because, again, nobody is being replaced. And you're artificially separating these populations. And all of those children are now British. So they're now native. Also, I love the way... No, not love. I hate the way you guys willfully switch between statistics. One moment you care about whether they're white, another you care about whether they're from the UK or not. You know, a lot of these are non-UK white people who you don't worry about. So, you know, make up your mind and keep your statistics. Keep your statistics consistent and consider the whole. And yeah, two groups of people artificially separated having babies is not ethnic suicide, and birth rates normalise within about 3 generations. On my old 1000 Dead Worlds playthrough, which I somehow missed before, Michael Z. Myers really loved it, found it very immersive, not normally an audiobook person, but liked it, and says it was all great work. I keep meaning to go back to it, but realistically I'm not going to, which was basically what you were asking. Right, on the politics video about the trans community, Toby Roby says, correction, transgender community. The idiots, actual trans people like Blair White, Sophia Narwitz and Buck Angel are against people who want to reinforce conservative sex stereotypes and target children. Nobody is targeting children outside of, if you want to be pedantic, probably a scarce handful of people, because there are bad people in every single community or group that you care to put together. Blair White, I wonder if she has buyer's remorse yet. I doubt Sophia Narwitz supported Trump, so yeah, I know Blair did, and well, she deserves everything she's going to get, I guess. There are trans trenders, right? I don't want to completely wipe that out, but my concern is the much bigger community of people who do have genuine gender issues and deserve to be treated seriously, and to be supported so they don't kill themselves. Michael Sutherland says, I think the TQ plus, trans queer plus, is largely overreacting, especially in the US. American culture today is radically different from UK culture in the 1980s. Trump's targeting the education and medical efforts to promote gender-affirming care is not going to result in the cultural repression of LGBT plus adults, or kids for that matter. It's largely meant to be limiting the life-altering medical procedures and medicines that likely are exceedingly dangerous to minors whose bodies and brains haven't fully developed yet. Never mind the puberty blockers that were developed out of the medicines used to chemically castrate men in the past, which largely resulted in self-harm and worse. But they're not going to permanently be on puberty blockers. It's to give them more time to decide and to understand themselves. That said, I don't think we have enough long-term studies on puberty blockers, but then on the other hand, there are other medical conditions which require the use of puberty blockers. People whose lives are going to be made a lot more complicated and dangerous by all this. No one is promoting this, right? It's just greater awareness and understanding and better access that's going on. That's not the same as promoting something, anything more than, you know, the book that started the Section 28 scare was promoting homosexuality. It was just acknowledging its existence, right? And that was helpful to a lot of people. And then a very conservative culture and political culture took everything back a massive step. And American culture is much more conservative even than UK culture was in the 1980s. So yeah, this is bad, and it's all based on scaremongering nonsense, I'm afraid. Of the trans community, which is already a tiny fraction of people, only a tiny fraction of minors ever get any of these procedures, and it's all with a great many safety checks and levels of consent and so on, and bottom surgery is never done on minors. So there's just nothing to this. It's a panic. Midnight Green says, you continually seem to miss the point that America doesn't want this shit for our children. The trans activists absolutely went after the kids, so now they can boo fucking who at the natural consequences of their actions. Okay, a lot of trans activists are super annoying. Yes, absolutely, 100%. To the denigration of their own community. But that doesn't excuse punishing everyone or making life more difficult for kids who are struggling with this, right? What's best for the kids is what should guide us, and that's never been repression and ignorance and trying to suppress who and what they are. You know, you can look at the Catholic Church to see just how bad repression does for people. Alexa Baxter says, promote and mutilate are such fun weasel words, aren't they? Yes. I mean, as I pointed out in the video, you could interpret, mutilation of minors to include circumcision. I hope somebody does and takes it to court. Promote is doing a lot of heavy lifting because raising awareness and showing that this is a thing that is normal. That's not actually promotion, but people are going to pretend it's promotion, which is why Section 28 was so fucking terrible. Khmer is cool says, it's divide and conquer politics, sacrifice a minority to boost loyalty of the masses. As an added bonus, he hopes the country will end up with more peasants this way. Russia's contemporary trend of gay bashing also started with anti-promotional law in the situation when nobody was actually promoting anything. Currently being gay is already illegal, and soon those who haven't left will hang, I think. Yeah, Russia's a lesson on how this tends to go. I mean, slippery slope is a logical fallacy, but a lot of slopes are nonetheless slippery. A few people brought up the Cass report, which, as if that's kind of settled. It isn't. By any stretch, the Cass report was extremely controversial. The British Medical Association initially considered rejecting the Cass review, but ultimately voted to publicly critique it instead. But many British Medical Association members were incredibly dismayed by the decision, and some resigned in protest. And the BMA is a pretty conservative, objective and science-led organisation. The Cass report was a politically commissioned report, so I would take it with a pinch of salt rather than the be-all and end-all. As for Trump targeting minors only, he says gender-affirming care and goes on to describe a caricature of what Republicans in their fevered imaginations think is happening to children. But he says gender-affirming care first without specifically excluding adults. He says cease all programs that promote, which is a weasel word, the concept of sex and gender transition, and then he says at any age, right? So that's not just kids. He says remove any and all federal money from health programs for these procedures, which is wealth gating potentially life-saving care. Again, no age limit is mentioned. Chemical intervention, puberty blockers, hormones and so on is sometimes warranted. As I alluded to earlier, puberty blockers is a bit more complicated. But you need to go through puberty to have some of the surgery effectively. But as with anti-abortion bullshit, this leads to deaths. With anti-abortion bullshit, it's deaths of women. With this, it will be deaths of young trans kids. And this will happen because medical practitioners will be scared off providing treatment, just as they've been scared off providing treatment to women suffering miscarriages and so on. So this will lead to the deaths of kids who can't access even the well-understood aspects of care and the process of transition. Plus, he intends to let people with regret sue. Now, just as with the absurd ex-gay movement, there are people who get brainwashed after the fact, or who want to people please, or struggle with guilt, or the judgment of their families, and so on. And while this is incredibly rare in an already small and rare population, This will create a threat against those specialist doctors and effectively take them out of practice over a long enough arc of time, which will create a shortage of practitioners who are brave enough and qualified enough to do this for people. He even says any school or educational body that even acknowledges the existence of trans people will be threatened when it comes to their funding and so on. And higher education isn't kids. Excuse me. Acting voiceover says it's literally being promoted everywhere, including big corporations which have gone woke, schools, etc. You people are demented. It existing is not the same as it being promoted. I agree, it's sometimes ridiculous. There shouldn't be a gay, blind, spastic, trans, racial minority in a wheelchair in every single advert for every single product. Sure, but not for reasons of bigotry, just for reasons of it looks weird and stupid when it's in everything. Bar Hawkman says excluding from the military is actually perfectly reasonable. Anyone who needs special medical treatment is excluded, so post-op are out for that reason alone. And while then you have the fact that the military categorises everyone as a man or a woman in ways that require using the actual biological gender. Yes, the old Olympics example comes up here too. Also, what rights? The right to pretend to be a woman at will so you can spy on them in the bathroom? No, that is a crime. Being trans is fine as long as it doesn't affect anyone around you. You have no right to demand others cater to your insanity. Okay, but you have no right to impose your bigotry on other people. So long as it's internal, so long as it's in your own head, then that's fine. But if you have no right to demand others cater to your insanity, then obviously you have no right to demand that they cater to your insanity. You have no right to exclude them from the military, provided they're fit and able to serve, right? And all of these other things. You know, you're entitled to your beliefs, you're not entitled to enforce them on others. And they're, by and large, not seeking to enforce them on you. You don't have to think whatever about them, you just have to treat them with compassion and humanity. Wraithing says, Epstein friend and partygoer stands up for the rights of minors. Doesn't really work, does it? Minorities make easy targets for bullies, and just like Section 28, make a horribly easy deflection from all the huge-scale corruption being conducted, but at a terrible expense for a vulnerable few. I'd have presumed there were already laws about conducting medical procedures on minors, and people are unable to give proper adult consent. But there are certainly tradition exceptions made for religious groups. Considering who's been funding both the permitted political parties in the US, certainly since Obama, I doubt Trump will tackle them. Okay, I don't like the anti-Semitism, but otherwise I think you're on track. Transgender issues aren't really my wheelhouse, though. I'm okay with anyone, no matter how they choose to love and live, and after the practicalities of comfort, utility, weather, warmth, armour and pockets, clothes and other adornments are definitely just a culturally defined dressing up game. But because of that, I value tolerance for all, so I'm ill-suited to all the debates about this stuff. Okay, saying anti-Semitism may have been a bit strong, but it certainly felt implied there, especially with the oblique reference to the circumcision that I brought up. So, yeah, take that as you will. There are already laws and a great many hoops to be jumped through. Barely any trans youth get any surgery, and of the surgeries that are undertaken, it's really only top surgery that is ever done, and that requires consent of the child or really teenager, very near adult for most of them. Requires their consent, requires the consent of the doctors involved, requires the consent of the parents involved. Yeah, there's a lot of hoops, and it has to be an extreme case. So, I mean, yeah. It's a huge fuss about almost nothing. Mercutio says, as reprehensible and utterly hateful as Trump is, he's smart enough to target his agenda to appeal to his massively right-wing demographic. Emotionally charged propaganda that the first-order thinkers will lap up to validate their own perspectives. 1988 to 2003, 2000 in Scotland, was a long time to suffer under Section 28 and affected the lives of thousands of people. Trump's vitriol is set to affect untold millions. How a convicted criminal, homophobe and bigot was re-elected in the first place still utterly confounds me. Same here. I mean, people say, economy, which he's going to make worse anyway, and he wasn't good on the first time around. But I guess everything else is fine as long as you have cheaper eggs. I mean, the first time around they talked about him draining the swamp, right? But his administration was the most nakedly corrupt administration ever, I think. A lot of Americans like to think of themselves as being anti-authoritarian, you know, we don't like dictators, we don't like being told what to do, and yet Trump is, I mean, first time around he was quite authoritarian. Now he's being extremely authoritarian. He is shit-testing the Republican Party with his suggestions. The people he wants to install are all sycophants who will do exactly whatever he wants. You know, this is naked corruption, naked authoritarianism. I mean, it's certainly probable, I think, that Trump is a wee bit of a child molester, or an ephebophile, at least, given the sort of late releases about Epstein and more tapes and things that came out just before the election. You know, he was very definitely a friend of Epstein. He's photographed with him. He's mentioned in Epstein's notes and recordings and everything else. The investigative journalists who've looked into it seem to think there was a very definite link with Trump. And yet these people think he's somehow the enemy of this satanic cabal of child molesters, when he was actually involved in a trafficking ring, probably, or at least passively, or friends with someone who was running one at the very least. Everything they claim to hate. Yeah, and you know, he's tried to appoint Matt Gaetz, a man who's very likely a sex trafficker of very young girls. And he's appointed RFK, who is the man chiefly responsible for the Samoan measles epidemic due to a collapse in vaccination in Samoa. And now here he is, he's going to increase vaccine hesitancy and God knows what else in the US. And a fucking Fox News host, a SecDef, who's zero qualification to be there. And Tulsi Gabbard, who Russia has repeatedly admitted is an asset of theirs, or claimed as an asset of theirs. I mean, alright, she looks good in yoga pants, and you know, I would. Hate fucks are underrated, but I wouldn't put her in charge of anything. Oh yeah. Okay. On more unpopular politics, Matt Shaw says, I'm reminded of people insisting Fahrenheit 451 is about censorship, even after Ray Bradbury insisted it wasn't. Sometimes one interpretation fits a worldview too much for people to accept it any other way, I suppose. So it still was about censorship, but not what is typically the American conception of censorship. The idea in Fahrenheit 451 was that people were just dumbed down because they wanted to be dumbed down. It was the people that demanded that these books and so on be controlled and gotten rid of. So it was a bottom-up form of social censorship, more like what we're experiencing today, rather than a top-down Big Brother style censorship. At least that's my understanding of it. Alright, this went on way too long. I will see you all soon. Zara. There's a magical time on the cusp of true adolescence, where you're no longer quite a child and not yet an adult. A time where the confidence of the teenager and the wonder of the child combine in a surge of optimism, hope and imagination to make some of the most important moments of our lives. There's a rich vein of films that tap into this time. These are the films where the kids save the world, find something fantastical, or solve a problem that the adults can't, or wouldn't even believe existed. Some of these are fantastical, some are not. Some are a loving homage to the older versions of the same sorts of stories. If you like The Goonies, Super 8, The Monster Squad, or Explorers, this is a game for you and your kids. available at post-mort.com and drive-through RPG.